Can we trick someone into triggering a malicious payload on their own computer just by using this mouse? Recently, Glitch implanted a USB rubber ducky inside a fully functioning mouse, which we can now deploy on our next red team engagement. The question is, can we get the unsuspecting user to trigger a payload when they're logged in and working? Boom, our keystroke injection happens, and look at this. I've explored all the options with DuckyScript 3, and I'm going to share with you a devious trick, this time on Hak5. Welcome to Hak5, I'm Darren Kitchen, and on today's Dose of Technolust, we are diving into a mock red team engagement where we are going to trick our unsuspecting target into launching a Canary token payload on their own computer. And if we're successful, well, as the attacker, we're going to get notified when the payload runs, and we're going to glean some sensitive information that we can then put in our report and wow the client. So, as you know, USB rubber ducky looks, feels, smells just like a regular flash drive, but it is capable of injecting keystrokes for automation and pen testing. Common attack scenario is littering a conference room with these, or even just outside the premises in the parking lot. The hope is that a curious individual is going to pick one up, plug it into their computer, expecting it to be a benign flash drive. Really, if you label it with like vacation photos or payroll data, you're really going to make the pot sweeter. In any case, a company with a good security posture, though, may have done security awareness training where the employees are smart enough not to plug in random flash drives into their computers. And honestly, that's a good thing. So on this mock engagement, we are going to assume that is the case. So instead of disguising our keystroke injection attack tool as a flash drive, we've actually implanted it inside of an ordinary mouse. And this is actually a follow-up video to a recent one here on the channel by Glitch, who performed this mod, so be sure to check that out. Now, we've gone ahead and done our initial recon, determined what the operating system that the organization is using, as well as what brand and model of mouse that they've standardized on. We've gone ahead and done this mod, and now we just need a payload. And with that, let's go ahead and talk about our objectives. There are 5 primary goals for this payload. The first is to cloak the appearance. We want it to look and feel like a real mouse to that operating system. 2 is we only want this to work inside the organization. So if, the malicious Ducky mouse gets taken off site, it's not going to do anything bad. 3 is to only run when the user is logged in. And we're going to need to get really crafty with this to determine that. 4 is we want to execute extremely quickly. Like the keystroke injection part of our payload needs to happen faster than our target user has any ability to do anything to stop it. And then finally, we need to provide some meaningful data. We got to get some loot that's going to impress our client, right? So let's go ahead and dig into the DuckyScript, and then we're going to see how we achieve these objectives. I'm here in Payload Studio now, and let's take a look. Now, throughout our payload, we're going to have to use 2 different elements that we want the user to be able to configure. The first is the IP or host name of the SMB server, and then the second is how long to wait between the first injection of caps lock / waiting for caps lock and the second. So let's go ahead and use the define command to make that a configurable thing in our payload, and it's always best practice to put those at the very top of the payload. So in that case, I'm going to do define, and it's always good to begin it with a pound, SMB path. And in my case, I have a listener set up at 192.168.86.62. That's obviously going to vary based on your engagement. Same thing with the caps delay. So we'll say caps delay, and I'm just going to make this a minute, which in milliseconds would be 60,000. Then we can actually get to being a keystroke injection device. So far nothing is happening, so we need to actually specify an attack mode. In this case, we're going to use attack mode hid, so we're just going to show up as a keyboard. And I really want to use the vendor ID and product ID of the actual mouse keyboard combo in question here. And so in our recon, we've determined that this is a shop that uses the Logitech K120, which is a very inexpensive mouse keyboard combo that you find in many organizations. So we are going to go ahead and clone the vendor ID and product ID. Obviously, you can find a full list of those. I've got links in the show notes to where you can find a list of literally every vendor and product combination of any device that you want to mimic. So in this case, I'm going to set the vendor ID or VID over to 046D, which is Logitech's, and then the PID or product ID is going to be C31C. So the computer is going to see this as a familiar device, a Logitech K120 keyboard. We're going to say man or manufacturer and say Logitech, and then we're going to say serial. And I don't know, like we'll just come up with some numbers to look legit. And then prod or product name, and we'll say K120 mouse. So this will show up if anybody really wants to go and do the forensics and get into Device Manager and see like, oh hey, there's a device. It's like, well, it says K120 mouse and that's literally what I've got on my desk, so probably that. After we've set up that attack mode, typically you want to put a delay. There's also like OS detection that we want to do because we really only want to target the Windows boxes on this network or in this institution. So I'm actually going to do both of those using one little extension, which is so cool because there's actually a way to passively, without injecting any keystrokes or anything, detect whether it's a Windows box. And by doing so, you also do what's called a detect ready state, where instead of putting like a delay 3000 or just waiting arbitrarily 3 seconds before injecting keystrokes, you can actually detect whether or not that host is ready to receive keystrokes. And what's really cool about this is using Payload Studio, all I have to do is type extension and the name of the extension, which is passive_Windows_detect. And you'll actually see it populate there and we can kind of see like, oh, okay, this is what that looks like. And you'll even note that it's already folded in here for me. So I actually don't have to look at all of the insides of this extension, but if I wanted to, on line 11 here, I can twiddle this down. I can see it's version 1.1 by Corbin, and here's like a block of documentation that explains how it's used. So there's even an example code that says, hey, if $_OS equals Windows, then hey, it's a Windows box, and then otherwise, it's not, which is exactly what we want in this case. So if somebody unplugs this mouse from our target Windows box and plugs it into a Mac or a Linux on the desktop box, if that's a thing, then it's not going to do anything. So with that, we can now go ahead and move on to kind of the next major section of this, which is now to say like, all right, well, we've determined that it's a Windows box. We've waited. It's now, let's just go ahead and wrap it inside of a little if statement and say, if, just like that extension demonstrated, OS is Windows, right? And we'll go ahead and end this if, and inside of there we're going to put our goodies, and at the end, right, we'll do attack mode off, which actually just disables the device completely. It's not even going to show up in Device Manager. So if we just follow through this, what we can see is that we go ahead and start out and we've got our defines here, which we just use so that, the next person using this script can more easily adjust it. We've got our attack mode that is very specific to the mouse keyboard combo that we're, have done our recon and are targeting. And then we've done our passive detection, and all of the goodies are going to happen inside of this if it's a Windows box statement. And then if it's not, it's going to move on past that if statement and do attack mode off. So again, if you plug this into a Mac, it's going to attack mode off. If, in fact, when it's done with this if statement, it's going to go to the next line and go attack mode off. So this is a one-shot kill. This is only going to execute one time. Obviously, we could put this in a while true forever loop, but for our engagement, we actually only need this to ever happen one time. So with that, let's go ahead and populate our little if statement here. And within it, we're going to check if caps lock is not already on. And if it isn't, we're going to turn it on. We could blindly just hit caps lock, but if it's already on, we don't want to turn it off. You'll see why in a second. So let's just say if, and this is really nice because we're using these internal variables. They start with $_, and you'll see that we actually have a whole list of them right here as we see the autocomplete in Payload Studio. So I'm actually going to just go ahead and say if caps lock on is false, and we'll end our if, then what we're going to do is hit caps lock. So it's just as simple as that, right? So we hit the caps lock key if it isn't already on. Well, what else? Then we're going to do a wait for, and there's a bunch of wait fors, and we're going to say caps lock or caps, wait for caps. And we're going to do, there's off and there's on, but there's also change. And that's literally just going to sit there pausing the execution of the rest of the payload until the caps lock key is toggled. Now we already know it's on because you check to see if it was on or not. And if it was off, we turned it on by hitting caps lock. But this way, we're not going to execute anything further. So the idea here is, if we like switch over to, say, our Windows box, actually that's our listener, but if we take a look at our Windows box, it's here at the login screen, right? And if caps lock is on, it's even going to say, hey, caps lock is on. The user is going to be like, oh, caps lock's on. I'm typing my password and nothing's on, it's not going to log in. So they're going to press caps lock, and that puts us, right here in our payload at that wait for change. So then we're just going to wait, because it's probably only going to take them a few seconds to log in, but we want to wait quite a bit. So we're going to go ahead and do delay, and we're going to delay for this caps delay time right here. So actually, just by doing delay, caps delay, we're saying, hey, delay for, in this case, 60 seconds. In fact, in Payload Studio, if you hover over, it's going to say it's optimized because we're using DuckyScript 3, and that it's going to go ahead and be replaced with 60,000, which means that when you're sharing this payload, the next person to use it doesn't have to dig through line by line and find all of those esoteric delays that you put in that were perfect for your engagement. So just makes it a little bit more configurable. So once we've actually delayed, in this case 1 minute, right, the user's logged in, we're going to go ahead and do quite simply caps lock. So we've now turned it back on, and we can now do a wait for caps change, just like before. But this time, when they press it, that's when we're going to inject our keystrokes. That's when we're going to do the actual attack that's going to call back to our SMB listener, and we're going to get that token. So in that case, how do we do it? Well, the simplest way is just to open up the Windows run line. You know how much I love the Windows run line. GUI-R from Windows 95 all the way to today still works and is a great way to inject just a little bit of code. And in this case, all we want to do is go to a network share over SMB, which in the Windows world is just a matter of typing // either the host name or the IP address. So in this case, let's go ahead and do we'll delay for half a second to wait for that Windows dialog to appear. And that's when we're going to type, and we'll do so string line is going to type and then hit enter for us. So what are we going to type? Well, // and then in this case the host name or IP address, which we've already defined up here as our SMB path. So I'm just going to copy this, put it down here, and again, just like before, if we actually take a look at, if we hover over here, it's going to go ahead and say that define SMB path modifies this line replacing SMB path with, in my case, 192.168.86.62. Obviously yours is going to differ. And then that's going to hit enter, and you know what? The Windows box is going to make that call over SMB, and we're going to get the goodies. Now we don't want to leave that open, or maybe we will. I mean, depending on what you're trying to do here, you might actually want to leave that Windows, SMB share open, because you might have even further, social engineering goodies on there, some enticing documents that you want them to open. So, depending on whether or not, we could actually really go into the weeds with this payload, make it even more configurable as to whether or not you want to leave that open. I'm going to hard code it to close, and I'm just going to simply delay for 2 seconds. Sufficient for this network for it to open that share, and then I'm just going to hit Alt F4, which, as we know, gets you ops on IRC or Discord, or closes the current window that you have open. So what this means is, and we'll go ahead and end our if statement right there. Hey, we're done. What this means is the user, right, whether the screen was locked or not, caps lock is going to go on as soon as the mouse is plugged in. When they realize, hey, caps lock is on, that's weird, they're going to hit caps lock. Now we have positive confirmation. As the USB rubber ducky, we get that feedback from their keyboard that the caps lock key has been pressed. This is the magic of keystroke reflection. And then we're going to wait 60 seconds. Do it again, cruise control for cool, and they're like, why is caps lock on again? And so they press it, and they trigger the payload that's going to go ahead and hit our listener. So there you go. It's going to pop up for just a second, and it's going to happen quicker than they can think to what? Unplug their mouse? That doesn't make any sense. So that's, I have a really good feeling about this being very successful in an engagement. So let's go ahead and load our USB rubber ducky with this payload. So I'm going to go ahead and just plug this here into my computer. I've done the button mod so I can just squeeze it, and it's going to go ahead and become a flash drive. And right here within Payload Studio, if I hit Command Enter or Control Enter on a Windows box, it'll go ahead and actually compile this payload that I can now just save and replace inject.bin and say yes, replace it. Hooray, file's downloaded, and now I can go ahead and unplug this, and let's go ahead and plug it into our unsuspecting Windows box that we've got right over here. Plug in the USB rubber ducky and take a look at that light. Boom, the caps lock light is on this computer. And if we go to log in, it's going to say, hey, caps lock is on, right? So I'm going to press caps lock. Now it doesn't say caps lock is on, hooray. I can go ahead and type in my super secure password and log in. Now, I'm just sitting here at the Windows desktop waiting for whatever. I'm just using my mouse as usual. But if we actually take a look at our Linux box that we have set up with SMB, with the Impacket SMB server, which is an amazing utility that mimics a SMB or SMB2 server, it's going ahead and creating a share called A, because I'm trying to keep it short, to /TMP. You can make this to be wherever. And in just a minute, what's going to happen is the caps lock key is going to come on again on this computer. And that's where we can trick our unsuspecting victim into pressing the very key that's going to trigger the payload that's going to give us a canary, and quite the canary, in fact, because we get timestamps and usernames and the host name of the computer. So a minute has passed, the caps lock key is on, and now if I press caps lock, boom, our keystroke injection happens, and look at this. We get the user, we get the workstation ID, we even get the NTLM hash. This is such a fun hack. By the way, if you're going to do this pen test where you ship units to the IT department of the organization you're auditing, I highly recommend not getting the mice that come in a blister pack, but rather the little guys in the box that you can literally just pop open from the bottom, slide out, and then go ahead and perform the mod while leaving all of this fancy little tape and such on there, so it looks like it hasn't even been tampered with. Pro tip. Now, before we review, this is a good time to thank you for supporting Hak5 since 2005. The best way to continue supporting our independent hacker media is over at hak5.org, where you can find all of our pentest gear, textbooks, even an advanced DuckyScript online course. There's also a payload section at hak5.org where you can find this code along with hundreds of other scripts from our awesome community. So thanks again, we couldn't do this without you. Subscribe, like, share this with a friend. Now, to review, we've cloaked the appearance of the payload using the attack mode command in such a way that it's going to use the vendor ID, product ID, manufacturer, serial number, even product name that is going to match that of our actual mouse. We've also set this up not only to work inside of our organization, but also to not work if you do steal the mouse for some reason and try to use it outside the organization. And that's because the IP address we're accessing for the SMB share is a private internal address. That's where we have set up a listener, obviously with permission for our engagement with our target. And we're only going to execute keystroke injection attacks when the user is logged in by playing a little bit of caps lock whack-a-mole. We're doing this by basically using the wait for caps change command. And this way, if we plant the mouse when the workstation is locked, which it should be, then the payload will only get triggered after they've gone ahead and logged in, realized that caps lock is on, disabled it, and then a minute later, or which is configurable, you could have it be 5 minutes later, we're going to go ahead and toggle caps lock again. When the user then realizes that they're typing in all caps, they can go ahead and press caps lock, and that is what's going to trigger the attack. Now, if the computer wasn't locked when we went to go ahead and swap out the mouse with the malicious one, then the organization's got bigger problems. As for the actual keystroke injection, we're only typing between 12 and 19 characters. So depending on the IP address of our SMB listener, say if it's at 10.0.0.1, that's only 12 characters when you include the Windows key R, // and enter. And if it's 192.168.100.200, that's still only 19 characters total. Now obviously, you could actually make this even shorter with a single character NetBIOS name on a network, but I don't know. I mean, yes, that'd be 5 characters or about 30 milliseconds of injection, but personally, I like the reliability of just hard coding the IP address, and we're still way under 1 second, so I have pretty good confidence in this payload. And then finally, we want to provide some meaningful data for the end of our engagement in that report. And if we look at the logs from our in-packet SMB server, we can see that we're getting quite a bit from this short payload. The IP address, the computer name, the logged in user of our target, as well as their NTLM hash, and obviously a timestamp so we can say, hey, it was Karen in HR who got owned. And I can make that joke because literally that's my sister, Darren and Karen. I know. So what do you think? What would you do to improve this payload? Let me know in the comments. And thanks again so much for all of your support over at Hak5.org. I'm Darren Kitchen. Until next time, trust your technolust. Thanks for supporting Hak5. Find all our shows, community, and pentest products at Hak5.org.